I guess I'd like to start with the Heysel Stadium. And what effect that had on you and how you approached it as a photographer.
Yeah, I went there as a sports photographer, and it was the biggest game of the season, Juventus versus Liverpool, and I was so looking forward to it. I'm a fan as well as a photographer. It was going to be very colourful. You have to remember, back in '85, football was so much more exotic. We didn't see these teams. We didn't see Red Star Belgrade or whatever. We didn't know what they looked like. The shirts were even exotic. So I go and do Juventus, big black and white shirts, Liverpool in their red. Liverpool were flying, the top team in Europe. And I thought, this is going to be fantastic. So I get down there and I photograph the fans, the Juventus fans with their flares and big flags. And it was wonderful, you know, lovely stuff. And I just spotted down the other end, I was at the Juventus end, at the Liverpool end, a red wave going from one side to the other. And I thought, oh, I better go and do this. And I've done this hundreds of times. You do a bit of aggro before the game, but it doesn't lead to anything. You know, fortunately it stops, and you never even process the film in those days. Here I am talking about film, but so you don't process. I get down there, and as soon as I get down there, the wall broke on top of me. Now I had a sure shot camera, not much bigger than this camera box, you know, this lens case, you know, and I take 2 snaps, and then all hell breaks loose. And sadly, 38 people died, and it went from a great sporting, colourful occasion for me to me becoming a war photographer, me becoming really in the middle of all this stuff going on. And what was it? I didn't know what the story was. The wall broke on me. We sit here now, we know 38, 39 people died, and maybe other people have been badly hurt and whatever. But at the time, I'm shooting it, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know the story. You can blame editors for running hard pictures, but you can't blame photographers for taking them, because when we're in the middle of it, we don't know what's happening. Yeah. And I did go and do bodies that were blue, obviously dead. I did chase the ambulances down the road. I did go into the sort of mortuary area that they set up. But I didn't know. As I say, now we know it's 38, and maybe if I'd have realised 38 were going to die, maybe I wouldn't have done so many. But I have got one picture where they're all reaching out over the wall, and it's a picture of hope. You know, I know they all got out, so I feel justified in running that. But it is a horrific picture. And I've just been back to Heysel for a film I've just made, and it was stunning to go back and to sense it all again. And strangely, they rebuilt the stadium, but with the same dimensions, so you can tell where the wall was, and you can tell where the opening was, where the ambulances were, which is very macabre to go back. Yeah. But looking back on it, I've not done much sports since. You know, that was 85. I became picture editor of The Guardian in 88. So in a way, I felt at the time, if that's sport, you can have it. Yeah. But sadly, I went from a sports photographer to a news photographer in 2 seconds. And that's what stunned me, really, and still does. You know, I did a thing for Alan Green on the radio, on Radio 5, and I thought, well, I've spoken about it before, I'll be okay. And I'm down the line somewhere in the broadcasting house talking to him in Manchester or whatever. But of course, what he had all the sounds of the night. And when I hadn't heard those sounds in 30 odd years, and all of a sudden I'm hearing the ambulance alarms, I'm hearing people screaming. I'll never forget one horrific picture I have is a young guy on the terraces with all the shoes. Strangely, when these things happen, all the shoes get kicked off. And he's there with his black and white scarf going, "Mario, Mario." And it haunts me to this day, you know, this picture of this young chap looking for his friend, presumably dead, and the poignancy of all the shoes. You know, it's a very, very powerful picture. And I don't think you ever really get over it. It's something that happened to you. Then when I went on to picture edit The Guardian, I picture edited Hillsborough a few years later. And in a way, I went through my Heysel horror with other people's pictures from Hillsborough. Strange thing to say, that how can you be reminded? But I didn't really deal with it at the time. What we do as photographers, we get involved in something, it overtakes us, we become on some sort of autopilot. I was there, it was a foreign assignment for my paper. I was in Brussels. Brussels now is a hop away. You can get a train there and be there in a few hours. But then it was a foreign assignment. It's Wednesday, it's a European football. What does this mean to football? What does this mean to the country? So I didn't really deal with the time. But then when I did Hillsborough, I went through the sadness of it. And I was quite conscious of going through that.
Yeah. I've never been. I've been in demonstrations and felt, and you kind of get locked into a way of working because you're constantly looking, and there's so much going on around you, and I guess. Things happening quickly as well, and the sports thing is another wonderful picture you took, I think, of Johnson when he won. And his hand goes up in the air. Yeah. Did you know at that instant?
I knew it, and I thought I had sports picture of the year because I had this guy finger up. I had the Carl Lewis and what's our own man called? I've forgotten his name. Linford Christie.
Yeah.
You know, I had them all in frame, all in shot, and I thought I had the best picture in the world from the 100 metres, which is the hardest event to cover in any sports photographer's career because it's 9.6 seconds.
And you were on the...
And I was side on, and it made for me and everything. But then minutes later, or an hour later, he gets disqualified. And I've lost... But then I got another picture because I got a news picture. Yeah. So it had a life, but it hasn't had the life it should have had because it should have been one of the best pictures I ever took. Yeah. In fact, it's tainted by this man's terrible criminal use of drugs, and so it spoils it for Lewis, it spoils it for Christie, and ultimately spoiled it for Johnson. So in a way, as a non-pitcher, yes, I've got it, but it doesn't mean as much as I thought it meant when I took it.
Yeah. Highlights, I suppose, of that sort of era and that of your photographic life. What were the big highlights as sport-wise?
Gosh, so many. Brendan Foster, running in the rain at Crystal Palace, for me was just a great picture. I was learning how to do it.
Broke the world record.
Yeah, that's right. And I've got him running in the pouring rain on a Friday night. Yeah. People talk about the glamour of sports photography. It wasn't very glamorous that night, but I got him. Yeah. And then you go and do Carl Lewis in LA, beautiful looking man, 7 foot tall, he seemed to me, perfect hairstyle, epitomised the sporting prowess of America. And I got some beautiful pictures of him with the American flag, which has always been important in photography. And I mean, many moments, I suppose the Olympics are the big one because they, certainly then they weren't tainted by professionalism and whatever. Borg, McEnroe, the amazing matches, the boat race sinking, my first boat race, they sink, I get the blame for it, but it made a lovely picture. And so many others. My table tennis picture, a young Chinese guy throws a high serve and I get this picture. And I think I'll go to my grave as the guy who took the table tennis picture. People won't remember my name, but they'll remember the picture. And that's kind of, nice to know. But I loved it, and I did 15 years of sport at the Observer at a really high level, working with Welshman Peter Corrigan down in Penarth, and Hugh McIlvanney, the great sports writer.
Oh, one of the best.
Yeah, if I do another book, I'm going to call it "I Was Hugh McIlvanney's Driver." But no, it was wonderful. But as I say, tainted slightly with a Heysel. I shouldn't have had to record dead people in my sports work. I won News Photographer of the Year. Yeah, great accolade, but I wish I'd never won it. I wish I'd never had the picture to win it. I'd have rather won Sports Picture of the Year for a great gold picture from that game.
So how was the jump then? How did you find the jump from being a working photographer into picture editing?
Well, I found it relatively easy because I was experienced by, I was 40 in 1980, 87, 88, and I heard the picture editor's job was up at the Guardian, the guy was leaving. And I thought, well, I'll go for that. But they would never ask me because I was a sports photographer, happy at the Observer. So I went to see Peter Preston, who was the editor of the Guardian at the time. I said, look, I don't suppose for a minute you'd have thought about me, but I would love, what it was? I went in there with my argument was the Independent had just been out 6 months, was trailblazing. Yes. Great for photography, no advertising, great printing. And I said, you know what? I do talks about my own work. And someone said, Mr. McCabe, isn't it great what the Independent's doing in photography? And I thought, Christ, let me have a go with the Guardian, which was where I cut my teeth as a freelancer. And he fell for it. And we had 10, 13 years, together. And, the Indies still won the odd thing, but we sort of went for it, and I had a great competition, and I like competition, and I thrived on it. And sadly now, look at the Indie now, you'd never think they were interested in photography. Maybe the Guardian not so good as it was when I was there, but you'd expect me to say that. But we're now personality-led, and we weren't then. We were photographically led. And it was a marvellous time. And we had Jeff Morgan down here in Wales, Murdo MacLeod
Jeff Morgan, yes, of course.
Yeah. Roger Bamber, Dennis Thorpe, Don McPhee, David Sillitoe, great photographers. Yeah. And I used to just wind them up and send them out and argue for their stuff. But then gradually it wears down. And what happened to me was the computer came into newspapers, and everyone had a computer, the foreign editor, the sports editor. So in the past, I was editing the pictures as they came in as faxes, really, getting rid of the rubbish, hiding it in case I needed it. But I would have 10, 15, 20 great pictures. And I thought if I do a paper with those, would be all right. Because my view was the readers of The Guardian go to see good shows, go good exhibitions, watch good telly. They won't take rubbish from you. They want good pictures. And that was my argument. And we did that. But then when the computer came in on every desk, foreign editor, if I was foreign editor and I could see all the pictures from Greece or Italy or, these dreadful horror zones where things happen, I'd be the same. I say, look, I've got a reporter there. Here's a picture. I know you don't think much of it, but I'm going to run it because it fits. Now, I would have killed someone if I'd have stayed, because I'd have only put that picture in if it was a good picture. Yeah. And, of course, people are going to fight their corner.
How powerful do you think pictures are?
Oh, I think they're everything. They're what stop people, especially still pictures in this age of everything videoed and telly, all these telly channels and whatever. That young kid who was rescued off a beach, in his father's arms, that went everywhere and stunned people for a couple of days,
Is it a couple of days? Whereas when you look at Philip Jones Griffiths' work, where those are lasting pictures. And
it is for a few days because the stories get overtaken. And it's very hard now to work in that way because if you don't get your pictures back that day, there's no point.
No, indeed.
Whereas Philip and Don McCullum and people like that used to sit on their film for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then the magazines still run it, and you see these great spreads, and I've just done a film on Picture Post and the power of that, and George Roger in Life magazine for Belson. Pictures are stunning, and they're still stunned, I suppose then there was less pictures and they had bigger effect, whereas now, while we've been in here talking for half an hour, so many things have happened already.
Indeed.
Some poor editor's going through another 1,000 pictures. To be looking at 30,000 pictures a day. Now, how can any one head any one person wrap their head around it?
Why do you think that papers are driven so much by personality and X factor or X this or?
I think it's because of television making things like the Bake Off. Strictly Dancing and all these things, which fortunately I've never seen any of them. But I think because of that, the cult of that personality, then, everything is feeding off that. We feed off TV, TV feeds off us. The sort of standalone picture of the last wheelwright in Cornwall now has no effect. Whereas when I was doing it, it would look great on page 3, page 5, I used to love facing pages, as you term. And I used to keep them in a drawer for a rainy day, and at least you'd see a picture and say, well, that's a great photo. Imagine that guy's still making that, whatever it is. But now it's who won Bake Off. It's not even Beckham himself, it's Beckham's son as a model, and I just find it so trite and lightweight. And politics, sadly, has gone the same way. Politics are sort of... the energy for me of politics has gone. I saw Blair coming in, and it was wonderful, and wonderful pictures, wonderful story. Poor old Gordon Brown goes. Martin Arg was one of the photographers we had working. Saw the demise of Gordon Brown. He got permission to be in the room when he resigned. Fantastic stuff. Whereas now, Corbyn is not even liked by his own party. And it's a very difficult sort of...
and do you think there's too much sanitisation of...
it's all, the PR man. PR man for Corbyn is one of the Guardian's leader writers. Okay. So he knows how it all works, and he's not going to let him say the wrong thing. He's not going to let him be seen at a photo op if it's not right, these things. It's too controlled, and... I find when I was editing and working there wasn't so much control. Now there's managers control footballers, managers control politicians. rock stars won't come in a room unless it's perfect. As
yeah.
the game's gone. Whereas I worked in a time when you could chat somebody up and say, look, can I just do a quick picture in a corridor? And they would do it.
Yeah.
Now, you better see my agent. You better see my, my rep or whatever. And I'll tell you a funny story. I used to do football on a Friday morning, Spurs and Arsenal training. And I used to turn up, see the manager. He said, look, do 20 minutes. Don't do Alfie Kong because he's got a thigh strain or whatever. You say, fine. Now you turn up at Arsenal and Spurs, and they have little rooms, tiny little rooms, much smaller than here, and they bring a player into you an hour and a half after he's changed. So he's got his Armani T-shirt and all his gold bling and whatever. Right. And what can you do in a white room with a footballer that's in his civvies? Yeah. I'm a sports photographer, or I was then. Yeah. And it's just killed the whole thing. They think they're doing us a favour, but in fact they've neutralised the thing altogether. I want the mud and the rain and stuff, to make a picture of it.
Yeah, it was really funny you say that because I did Ashley Williams's book cover, and that was an extraordinary experience because I kind of expected what you've just described, but actually it was so open, it was unbelievable.
Oh, well done you. Yeah.
And I met his family. It was extraordinary. Yeah. I'll never forget it. And in actual fact, I was doing a pressy for Welsh FA, and he walked in. He saw me and he came over and he remembered my name.
Well done.
That sort of it stands out as things, little things that have happened to me. But. Your portraiture work, there's not many people who haven't photographed.
I know. Well, I love portraiture. I mean, I used to nip out the office. I used to ask the photographers, do they want to go and do Ian Dury or somebody like that, who I love because I love music and whatever. And they said, oh, no, can you get someone else? I don't really fancy it. So I used to go and do it because I loved Ian Dury, and it seemed to me to be important to do.
Indeed.
And I started doing portraits. I think I've always been a portrait photographer, even though in my sport, when I look back at it, a lot of it was boxing gyms and things like that. So and jockeys about to go on horses and things like that. So I think it's always been in me. And then I was lucky. I did 10 or 12 years of photographing Romanian poets and rock stars and failing rock stars who are making a comeback. And it was a great journey, and I've got a good library, and I do exist on that now. A lot of that library.
Yeah, you've got a Danny Absey shot, which is
exactly that. Yeah, Danny was brilliant. Yeah, he's fantastic for me.
And you've got a lovely photograph of Iris Murdoch as well.
That's right, with John Bailey.
That is a beautiful shot.
No, I had a great time doing them, and then I did a series of writers' rooms, which I love doing. And like all things in papers, when things are going well, somebody upstairs decides that we've had enough of that. But I did 2.5 years of that, and that was fabulous. Photographing people's spaces without them in it was a great thrill.
Did you do any detail when you were in their room?
I looked out for it, but it was mainly the room I was interested in. It's quite interesting how long it takes to photograph a room. You think you just put your head in a door and click, it doesn't. No. So, I mean, it started out as writers' desks, but then when we went round and most people had screens and keyboards, most writers' desks are boring. So I said, let's do the room. And the room's interesting because of the records or the pictures on the wall or whatever. So that was a great series. But I've had a great career, and I've reinvented myself. I've gone from music to sport to editing to portraiture. And now I come to a festival like the Eye Festival here, listen to a lot of people, and I get spurred on, and I think, well, I could do this, I could do that. Am I going to put enough time into it to do it as well as these kids? But I like to do landscape. I listen to David Hearn talking about doing the bridges of Wales and starting off doing the oldest bit of rock in Wales. What a great idea. I live in East Anglia. It's got a huge sky and goes like this. And I was brought up in a place that had uprights. We have no uprights in Suffolk. And of course, what can you do? You can only look down. So I should be looking down.
Wonderful, wonderful. Just sort of one final thing, I suppose. You've during this Eye Festival, you've always talked about the young people in the audience. How important is that education and the photography education, and where do you think it is in?
I think it's very important. I'm worried about them because I'm worried what they're going to do. And I've been trying to lay down a trail for them. I can't make them do it. They've got to do it themselves. But like this morning, I was saying you've got to get into video, through somebody else's voice. It's important that they pick up a video camera and know how to. We're in a room full of gear being used for different things. It's important they know how all this works. And I just think it's vital that they're not put off by the few opportunities. When I started, I was told, don't go into sport, there's too many sports photographers. I got through because I was keen, and I got good at it, and I could push myself and sell myself. And these kids will do it. You know, there's 30 in the room here with us now. You know, maybe 10 will make it, and then maybe 5 others will become curators. Another 5 might write about it. But if they're keen enough, and they seem a real tight-knit group, and they obviously have stuck around all weekend, which has been fabulous.
Yes, excellent.